From the Telesur English headquarters in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south, and I'm Sonia Gray. President of the Dominican Republic, Danilo Medina, has confirmed that the Venezuelan government and opposition groups have reached a pre-agreement at the peace dialogue talks in the Dominican Republic.
Based on the principle that nothing can be agreed upon until everything is agreed upon, we cannot give details about our progress so far. There are still matters to be discussed. We must bring these matters to Caracas first, to deliberate and come to a decision. We have between 3 and 5 days to do this.
Venezuela's Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez confirmed that the agreement is due to be signed when the meeting restarts on Monday. Rodriguez said the deal will enable an end to external and internal aggression, referring to sanctions, as well as the violent opposition-led protests.
Today, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela and the opposition coalition have signed a pre-agreement. We ask the whole world to respect and support the established terms on this pre-agreement. And when we sign the final agreement on Monday, they will have to respect our peace resolutions. They will support Venezuelan sovereignty and freedom.
In separate talks, the United Nations says the good offices process between Guyana and Venezuela has broken down, and it is sending the border dispute between the two countries to the International Court of Justice for a peaceful resolution. On Tuesday, the UN Secretary General released a statement where he said significant enough progress has not been made on the issue and the ICJ should be used to find a solution. But he also suggested that the continued good offices process may still be of use to both countries. Colombia's National Liberation Army, or ELN, has asked the government to comply with commitments in order to continue talks at the dialogue table in Quito, Ecuador. The government has dismissed calls from the ELN, saying their rosy declarations are incompatible with terrorist acts on the ground. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos ordered the suspension of the peace talks on January 29th after the bombing of a police station in Barranquilla over the weekend. 2 days later, indigenous organizations denounced a bombing attack carried out by the Colombian Armed Forces, presumably targeting an ELN camp in the department of Choco, wounding a youth in the indigenous territory. And Telesur sat down with Pablo Beltran, chief negotiator of the National Liberation Army, in an exclusive interview. He spoke to us about the challenges in trying to achieve sustained peace.
No one ever knows about the things that transpire around Colombia. For example, last night a bombing took place in the middle of the night in the south of Chocó. Those who were primarily affected were indigenous. Those Colombians don't count. But of course, an attack such as the one which took place in the major city of Barranquilla gets attention. I spoke to indigenous leaders. I said, of 3,000 agreements we've made in the recent decades, none of them have been fulfilled. The same is happening with the FARC. And so, all of their legal, economic and political security is collapsing. It seems as if the government of Colombia has an interest in making the FARC disappear as a political project. This puts the process in doubt and puts us on alert, because what's happening to the FARC may happen to us as well. Our demand is for the government to continue to hold the meetings in Quito and to arrive at a national dialogue. We want to leave the table at a point of consolidation that whichever candidate wins on August 7th has to respect the progress made. The challenge before President Juan Manuel Santos is to continue the process with the FARC and to maintain the dialogue with us.
7 legislators from the Peruvian Congress's biggest party have resigned after Kenji Fujimori was expelled from the party. The 37-year-old Kenji is the youngest child of former Peruvian dictator Alberto Fujimori. He's been battling with his sister Keiko, who leads the Popular Force Party. He says he was expelled after he helped to block a move to impeach President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. The resignations mean Popular Force now loses their majority in Parliament.
To take a decision to step aside, to take the important step of resigning from Popular Force, is because we have been run over, constant victims of the leadership of Popular Force.
At least one person has been wounded and several others arrested in clashes between farm workers and police in the city of Huánuco in Peru. Tensions turned violence when farm workers took to the streets to demand the government declare a state of emergency in the agrarian sector. Police officers responded with tear gas and by firing shots at protesters who descended on the Cahuana police station. We take a short break now. Join us again after this. Look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
Tonight I am calling on Congress to finally close the deadly loopholes that have allowed MS-13 and other criminal gangs to break into our country. We have proposed new legislation that will fix our immigration laws.
Welcome back. Ecuador's former president, Rafael Correa, is safely out of a radio station after violence outside prevented him from leaving. Correa said the station was surrounded by supporters of President Lenin Moreno. His security says some attackers had firearms, but that Correa wasn't hurt in the attack. Let's turn to Carla Gonzalez in Quito for more information on this incident, which Correa describes as an attack on his political rights.
Of course, we had a major story here in Ecuador. Former President Rafael Correa spoke to us exclusively from a radio station in Quinindé in the province of Esmeraldas, that's north of Ecuador, close to the border with Colombia. He said violent people were preventing him from leaving the radio station where he was speaking, and that some people had attacked the car that he was using to go to different interviews that he had in the same province. He said that people inside the radio station were afraid that people would be able to come in to attack him or prevent him from leaving the radio station. He said there were children and women present at the building. The building did receive some damages from this attack. Luckily, he was able to leave after waiting for police backup. We have to remember that Correa leads the no campaign in some of the questions, and at the referendum on Sunday, the Ecuadorians are going to vote on 7 different questions from different topics: economics, environment. There's also some political questions that he is opposing. So he has denounced that supporters of Lenín Moreno were outside of the radio station and they were responsible for this attack. So we'll come back to you as we know more information on this.
Thank you so much, Carla, for that report. And with just days to go, political parties and movements in Ecuador have intensified their campaign efforts. 13 million voters have to decide on 7 questions proposed by President Lenín Moreno, 5 of them that could modify the constitution. Political stakeholders have to end their campaigns on Thursday. From midnight Friday local time, political parties and movements will not be allowed any more electoral propaganda. And campaigning is intense outside of Ecuador's borders as well. There are thousands of Ecuadorians living in Venezuela, and they're being encouraged to cast their ballots.
Ecuadorians are being called on to vote from Venezuela on the 4th of February in Caracas. The Don Bosco School will be the main polling place where 14,000 registered Ecuadorians in the city will vote. There will be 27 polling stations open from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Social media has been our main tool to inform the community. Here in the consulate, we have received over 120 citizens a day, where we inform them directly. We also have visited the communities.
Valencia and Mérida are the other 2 cities with polling stations for this referendum. Voters must have their ID or their passport. In Venezuela, the campaign has started. The Ecuadorian Assemblyman for Latin America, Caribbean and Africa, Mauricio Zambrano, has come all the way to Caracas to meet with the Ecuadorian community in Venezuela's capital.
Even though these are questions that affect the Ecuadorian society, there are questions that need to be explained because they are a step back in our rights, and they shouldn't be approved in this referendum.
This referendum is deceptive, untruthful, and devious. We had worked for our country to keep going as it did with former President Correa, and we didn't expect this deception, and it hurts, not only to me, but to the Ecuadorian people and everybody that is here. I've been living here for 40 years, and we don't want to go back to the past.
This is a questionnaire that more than 13 million Ecuadorians will have to answer this Sunday. Questions 2 and 3 are the most controversial. The second talks about the indefinite re-election, and the third one talks about the restructuring of the Citizens Participation Council.
If the yes option wins in this question, it is true that the current members of the Citizens Participation Council will finish their term. But we cannot say that the new members will be in favor of one person or another.
40 political organizations that are authorized by Ecuador's National Electoral Council will remain on the streets until Thursday to try to convince Ecuadorian citizens to vote yes or no.
Here's a fun fact about Ecuador's elections. Ecuador was the first country in Latin America to allow women to vote. That breakthrough happened in 1929. One practice that has remained is that men and women have to use separate voting booths. Ecuador tried to change that rule last year, but various women's movements in Ecuador and abroad opposed the measure. They say the practice is a reminder that Ecuador broke ground by giving women's rights ahead of its peers. In the region, only the Dominican Republic has a similar voting process. Costa Ricans will also be going to the polls to choose a new president on February 4th. Our correspondent, Fernando Francia, has the latest.
Ya faltan pocos días para una nueva cita electoral.
The elections in Costa Rica will take place on February 4th, and the people are still undecided. According to research from the University of Costa Rica, candidates are still fighting for first place in the polls. There are 5 leading candidates, and mathematically, any of them could be the winner. If any candidate gets 40% of the vote, they will be declared official winner in the first round. If that doesn't happen, the first and second candidate will head to a second round on April 1st. This happened twice, once in 2002 and then in 2014, when the current president, Luis Guillermo Solís, was elected. The variety of parties and the undecidedness of voters has made it hard for the candidates and political analysts to gauge who will win the first round. The Electoral Council has said that everything is ready and that at 8:30 p.m. they will be counting votes and updating them on their website. The official announcement will be on Tuesday, February 6th. The electoral materials have been distributed and the Electoral Council expects a big outcome.
We thank Fernando for that report. The Jamaican Parliament has voted to extend the state of emergency agreed to on January 18 to May 2nd. The state of emergency was for the parish of St. James, which suffered from a wave of violent crime. In his argument for an extension, the Prime Minister referred to an ecosystem of crime in the area perpetuated by both public and private citizens. Of the 62 members of the House, all 51 members present voted for an extension of the state of emergency.
Mr. Speaker, the provision in law is that the Governor General may declare a state of emergency for a period not exceeding 14 days. An extension of the period must be approved by both Houses of Parliament by resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House.
Therapists in the Caribbean have met in Trinidad and Tobago to discuss the impacts of the 2017 hurricane season. Islands like Barbuda, Dominica, and Puerto Rico experienced untold devastation from Category 5 hurricanes. One psychologist explains that recovery is further impacted by a heightened sense of vulnerability and the loss of familiar faces due to death or migration.
I think one of the biggest impacts is an increased sense of vulnerability. That's something we're seeing particularly in Dominica now, because they had Tropical Storm Erica in 2015, which wreaked quite a lot of havoc, and Hurricane Maria in 2017, which has been much worse. So there is a national sense of vulnerability, and when you're talking about an island nation where people don't have somewhere else to go unless they leave their country and home completely, there's a sense of helplessness and being trapped. And that militates against people being able to recover. It wears down your sense of resilience, because everywhere you look, when you're in a small territory, everywhere has been affected. So you can't say there's this place I can go to or there's this spot that's okay. It's across the board. And so then you have to consider, as an aftermath, the loss of some of your people, because those who can leave the territory. The entire island of Barbuda was evacuated. Many, many people in Dominica have left. There was one school where 1/4 of the Form 5 students have gone.
Hundreds and thousands of undocumented immigrants, social organizations have mobilized to ensure their rights. Around 200,000 migrants marched throughout the capital, where they delivered 300 letters to Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, requesting a new process to help sort out people's immigration status. Social organizations have demanded an amnesty for migrants since 2015. We'll take another short break. Join us after a look at what our multimedia team is reporting on. Welcome back. Now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
Clashes have raged between the Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish militia in Syria's Afrin region. On Wednesday, wounded civilians were brought to the city's hospital, with reports saying heavy bombardment and airstrikes covered 2 large areas near the Turkish border. Russia's foreign ministry has condemned the offensive. She said many civilians have been killed since the start of Turkey's attacks against the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia.
According to the latest information, over the 10 days of the military operation, several hundred people, including civilians, have been killed. We are again calling on both sides to show restraint.
Afghan and U.S. forces have increased their attacks on militant strongholds in Afghanistan. Residents of Ashin in the district of Nangarhar province described how airstrikes have hit their village, killing their families and destroying their homes.
We were driving towards the central district and suddenly the U.S. forces bombed us. There were 11 of us in the vehicle and I was the only one who survived. The other 10 people, including my parents and cousin, were all killed.
Togo healthcare workers have joined thousands of demonstrations in a 2-day strike. The national strike was called by Togo's National Union of Hospital Practitioners, who are demanding better equipment and more nursing staff.
Some 40 million people tuned in to watch U.S. President Donald Trump as he delivered his first State of the Union address, one that made immigration and security the centerpiece of future policy. A large part of that audience were immigrants from Latin America and elsewhere, hoping Trump would relax his stance. But no stranger to controversy in the region, Trump continued his adversarial relationship.
There were loud protests against Donald Trump even before he delivered his State of the Union address, and the protests only got louder after. It was his first State of the Union address to Congress. President Trump took aim at the governments of Cuba and Venezuela, calling them dictatorships. The Trump administration has also said it will not recognize the upcoming presidential elections in Venezuela, a comment that did not go down well with the government.
The rude and eager interference of Donald Trump's administration has been defeated today in the city of Santo Domingo by the people of Venezuela, the people that loves peace, that loves the desire that we have to be free forever. The representatives of Trump's administration have nothing to say about the people of Venezuela.
Trump has come under fire for his statements about immigrants from Latin America, the Caribbean and Africa. His controversial wall and negative comments about the North American Free Trade Agreement have angered world leaders and people on the street alike. Trump said losing the NAFTA would be detrimental to Mexico's economy. He added whomever wins Mexico's elections later this year would need to be wary of him.
I do not agree with the wall. Now, with regard to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, I believe NAFTA has been beneficial for the three powers through its 25 years of existence, because we must consider ourselves one of them. We were in the 10th largest economy in the world, and we went down to the 14th, unfortunately. Without NAFTA, I think we would go back.
Trump also boasted of keeping the controversial Guantanamo Bay prison open. It's a complete turnaround from President Obama, who always promised to close the prison, but never did.
I'm asking Congress to ensure that in the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we continue to have all necessary power to detain terrorists wherever we chase them down, wherever we find them. And in many cases, for them, it will now be Guantanamo Bay.
That's a torture center. That is not a jail. That's a torture center. They reaffirm what Trump really reaffirms. Now, this presidency of the United States is close to fascism.
Cuban tourism officials are already wary of a drop in tourism. They blame the Trump administration's tighter restrictions on travel to the island.
And for more on Trump's State of the Nation address, here's our correspondent, Francesca Emanuel, with more.
Yes, President Trump targeted 4 countries in his first State of the Union address, and now apparently he has his own version of former President George Bush's axis of evil. These 4 countries were Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea. So far, we have seen the official reaction of the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. Responding to Trump's comment saying that Iran government is a rogue regime, Zarif said that the U.S. president confirms his ignorance. In an ironic tweet, he also said that his virtuous democratically elected clients in our region may cheer. He was referring to Saudi Arabia for sure, but not those on receiving end of their tyranny and weapons, including Yemeni children, he wrote in that tweet.
We thank Francesca for that report. The U.S. has proposed using American federal air marshals to travel with taser stun guns on cross-border flights with U.S. airlines. Mexico has ruled out the presence of U.S. air marshals in the country. Mexico has been trying to prove itself a good ally to the United States in the hopes that this will help its efforts to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, in terms that are as favorable as possible. But Videgaray has dismissed the strategy. Mexico bade goodbye and good luck to its Winter Olympics team on Wednesday. In a ceremony in Mexico City, the delegation of 4 received the Mexican flag from the Olympic Sports Committee. They will be competing in freestyle, alpine, and cross-country skiing in Pyeongchang, South Korea. The games kick off on February 9th. Mexico is hoping the Olympians will bring back a rare medal and help popularize winter sports in the Latin American country. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you so much for watching.